My brother announced it like he was doing me a favor. Dad's house is going to Tate, he said, cutting into his salmon at the dinner table, not even looking up. It just makes sense. Tate has the business. He needs the collateral. You're renting that place in Denver anyway, so it's not like you're hurting. I set my fork down very carefully, the kind of careful where your hands are shaking and you don't want anyone to see. My father had died 11 days earlier. I had been the one sitting beside his hospital bed for the last 4 months. I was the one who drove 2 hours each way every weekend from Denver to my parents' house in Colorado Springs, the one who learned how to manage his medication schedule, the one who called the insurance company 47 times, I counted, to fight the denial on his home care. My brother Tate had come to visit twice. My sister-in-law Bryn had sent a fruit basket. And now, 11 days after we buried my father, my mother was sitting at the head of the table, nodding slowly, and Tate was explaining to me why the house I had grown up in, the house my father had promised me in his will 3 years ago, was going to Tate's construction company as collateral for a loan. Dad's will says, I started. Dad's will is being probated, Tate said, finally looking at me. That takes time, and we need to move fast on the Briarwood contract. Mom agrees. This is what Dad would have wanted. My mother reached over and touched my hand. Sweetheart, you're stable. You have your job. Tate needs this right now. I am a licensed structural engineer. I have worked for the same firm in Denver for 7 years. I have never once asked my parents for a single dollar since I graduated college. While Tate was getting his construction company off the ground, my parents had bankrolled him through 2 failed ventures before this one. I had smiled and said nothing, every single time. I looked at my mother's hand on mine and I thought about the 4 months I had just given. The nights I had slept on that pull-out sofa down the hall from my father's room because he was afraid to be alone. The birthday dinner I had missed. The promotion review I had asked to postpone because I couldn't focus. You used me, I said. It came out quieter than I intended. Tate laughed, short and dismissive. Nobody used you, Leigh. You chose to help. That's called being a good daughter. Don't weaponize it now. I drove back to Denver that night in the dark, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I had a choice to make. I could trust the legal process, wait out the probate, and believe my father's written wishes would hold. Or I could start paying attention. I chose to pay attention. The first sign that something was already wrong came 6 days later when I called the estate attorney my father had used, a man named Gerald who had drawn up the will himself. I wanted to check on the probate timeline. Gerald was professional and measured, but something in his pauses felt careful in a way that made my stomach tighten. The will your father filed with this office in 2021 does name you as the primary beneficiary of the Colorado Springs property, he said. However, I should let you know that a superseding document was filed with the county recorder's office last month. My father had still been alive last month, but only barely. He had been on a morphine drip for the last 3 weeks of his life. He could barely form sentences. What kind of document? I asked. A quitclaim deed, Gerald said. Transferring the property to your brother's company, Meridian Build, LLC. It appears to have been signed by your father and notarized. I sat down on my kitchen floor. I didn't choose to. My legs just stopped working. When? I said. When exactly was it signed? He gave me the date. It was a Tuesday. I know exactly what my father was doing that Tuesday because I was there. I was sitting 3 feet away from him reading a John Grisham novel out loud because he liked the sound of a voice, and he was asleep for most of it. He had not signed anything that day. He could not have signed anything that day. I didn't tell Gerald that yet. I thanked him and hung up and sat on my kitchen floor for a long time. Then I started working. I am an engineer. I am comfortable with data, with documentation, with the painstaking process of finding the flaw in a structure that looks solid from the outside. I approached what my brother had done the same way I approach a load-bearing calculation, methodically, without letting my emotions make me sloppy. The notary stamp on the quitclaim deed was from a woman named Sheila Voss. Her commission number was public record. I cross-referenced her commission with the state notary database and found that she was also listed as an administrative assistant at Meridian Build LLC. She notarized a document for her employer, attesting to the signature of a dying man she had never met, on a day when I was in that room and no one came. That was the first crack in the structure. The second crack came when I requested my father's medical records from the palliative care team, his cognitive status assessments, his medication logs, his signed consent forms. What I got back made it clear that on the date of that notarized signature, my father had been assessed that morning as lacking capacity to make independent decisions. It was in the chart, plain as daylight. A nurse's note. A physician's addendum. The kind of documentation that exists precisely because someone anticipated it would matter later. He had been mentally incapacitated on the day he allegedly signed away his house to my brother's company. I sat with that for 48 hours. I read everything I could find about undue influence, elder fraud, and void deeds. I called 2 attorneys and got consultations. I was building a case the way you build a foundation, one verified fact at a time, nothing unsupported, nothing that could be knocked over by a good wind. Then Tate found out I was asking questions. The first call came from my mother. She was crying before she finished saying my name. "Leigh, please, you're tearing this family apart. Your father just died. Can't you just let us grieve in peace?" Tate is trying to keep the business alive. He has employees who depend on him. You'd really take food off their tables over a house? I told her I wasn't taking anything off anyone's table. I was asking about a document that appeared to be fraudulent. She stopped crying almost immediately. Her voice went flat. "If you pursue this, you're going to regret it. Tate has already spoken to some people at your firm." I went very still. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said in a tone I had never heard her use before, measured and deliberate, "that your brother is on the board of the Colorado Engineering Association. The people who do your license reviews. He has friends at your firm's parent company. He's not asking you to do anything unreasonable, Leigh. He's asking you to be a team player." She hung up. I stared at my phone for a long moment, and then I did something I immediately recognized as a mistake. I called Tate. I told him I had the medical records. I told him I told him I knew about Sheila Voss. I told him the notarization was fraudulent and that I was going to prove it. I told him he had 1 week to reverse the deed voluntarily before I took it to an attorney and the county DA. There was a silence on his end. Then he said, very quietly, "I'm going to give you some advice, little sister. Don't." That was on a Thursday. By Monday, the walls were falling. My project manager called me into his office first thing Monday morning with the expression of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. There was a manila folder on his desk. Inside it were 3 emails allegedly sent from my work account to a senior partner at the firm. The emails were erratic, accusatory, professionally unhinged. They claimed the partner had stolen credit for one of my projects. They used language I would never use. They read like the writing of someone in the middle of a breakdown. I had never written those emails. I had never sent them. "Your brother reached out to our managing director," my project manager said, not meeting my eyes. "He expressed concern about your state of mind following your father's death. He mentioned you'd been making erratic accusations against your family, that you might need help. And then these emails appeared." "Those are fabricated," I said. "Check the metadata. Check the send headers. Those didn't come from my account." "We're not equipped to adjudicate that," he said. "You have access to sensitive client data. Engineering liability is not something we can take risks with. We're placing you on administrative leave pending an internal review." "I'm sorry, Leigh. I genuinely am." I walked out of that building carrying a small box of desk items. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive. It moved fast after that. My professional reputation in the local engineering community started to fray. I could see it in the way a colleague stopped responding to my texts, in a LinkedIn connection quietly removed. Tate, I found out later, had been making calls, mentioning my instability casually, the way you mention a rumor you're pretending not to spread. My mother posted something on Facebook, not about me directly, but about the pain of watching a child struggle with grief in destructive ways. Her friends commented with prayer hands. Brennan, my sister-in-law, shared it. Then the letter arrived. It was from Tate's attorney. He wasn't just holding the house. He was suing me for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress, claiming my false accusations of fraud had damaged Meridian Build's reputation and jeopardized the Briarwood contract. Attached to the lawsuit filing was a document I had allegedly signed 14 months ago, a letter to my father in which I supposedly acknowledged that the house had always been intended for Tate's business and that I had no claim to it. A letter expressing gratitude, in my own handwriting, for my family's generosity in my upbringing. It was a forgery, a very good one. The date on the letter was the weekend of my cousin's wedding in Albuquerque. I have photos from that wedding. I have a hotel receipt. I was not in Colorado Springs that weekend, and I did not write that letter. But looking at that signature, I understood something that made me feel cold all the way through. They hadn't done this in a panic after I started asking questions. This was prepared. This letter, this notarized deed, the emails from my work account. It had all been arranged in advance. While my father was dying in that back bedroom, while I was reading John Grisham out loud to a man who could no longer answer me, my brother and his wife had been building a trap with my name on it. I lost my income. My savings were evaporating on legal consultation fees. I was facing a civil suit, a potential professional license review, and a document that placed me on record as having voluntarily surrendered my inheritance. I was sitting in my apartment one night eating cereal for dinner, reading through the lawsuit filing for the 9th time, when I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "Call me. It's about your dad. I was his home care nurse for the last 6 weeks. My name is Flora. I think you need to see something." I called her. Flora had been hired through the palliative care agency. She had been at the house 3 days a week. She was soft-spoken and precise in the way that experienced medical professionals often are. She chose her words carefully because she understood that words had weight. She told me that during her last 2 shifts, she had noticed Tate and Bryn in the house more often than usual. That she had seen Bryn at the small desk in the hallway on 2 separate occasions with paper spread out and what looked like a signature practice sheet. Block letters. Cursive. Repeating the same marks over and over. "I didn't know what it meant at the time," Flora said. "But after your father passed and I heard what was happening with the house, I kept thinking about it. I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. I asked if she would be willing to give a written statement. She said yes. I also asked her one other thing. I asked her if my father, in those last weeks, had ever talked about the house. About me." She was quiet for a moment. "He talked about you a lot," she said. He said he hoped the house would give you roots. That was the word he used. Roots. He said you'd spent your whole life being the responsible one, and nobody had ever given you a foundation that was just yours. I cried for a long time after I hung up that phone. The kind of crying that's not just grief. It's the release of something you've been holding rigid for months because you couldn't afford to fall apart. Then I dried my face and got back to work. I had Flora's statement. I had the medical records establishing incapacity. I had the notary conflict of interest. I had my hotel receipt and photos from the Albuquerque wedding, time-stamped, on a phone that had never left my possession. And I had an attorney now, a real one, not consultations. A woman named Petra, who specialized in elder law and estate fraud and who, when I laid everything out for her on a Tuesday afternoon, looked at me with a calm, steady expression and said, "This is a strong case. This is actually a very strong case." But Petra also said something else. She said that the civil case and the criminal referral were 2 different tracks and that I needed to think about timing. If we file the civil challenge first, your brother knows exactly what's coming and has time to react. If you want to do this right, we lead with the criminal referral and let law enforcement move first. I thought about the dinner table. The salmon. Tate not even looking up. "Let's do it right," I said. It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of me going about as normal a life as I could manage, picking up contract drafting work from a small firm to cover rent, not calling my mother back, not engaging with anything Tate sent through his attorney. 6 weeks of Petra working with a detective in the county sheriff's financial crimes unit and a contact she had at the state attorney general's office who handled elder exploitation cases. Tate had scheduled a press event. The Briarwood development was a significant contract, a residential complex in a growing suburb of Colorado Springs, and he had arranged a groundbreaking ceremony with local media coverage. There were city council members invited, a state legislator, He had rented a tent and hired a caterer, and the whole thing was very official, meant to establish Meridian Build as a serious player in the local development scene. The Colorado Springs property. My father's house, the house I had grown up in, was listed in the press materials as the primary collateral asset of record. Petra told me I didn't have to be there. She said the arrest would happen regardless, that my presence wasn't legally necessary. I thought about my father saying he wanted me to have roots. I went. I drove down from Denver the morning of the groundbreaking. I wore the charcoal blazer I usually save for presentations. I parked 2 blocks away and walked to the event site, and I arrived just as the caterers were setting out the champagne flutes. Tate saw me before I was 20 feet in. His face did something complicated. Surprise first, then a very fast recalibration into contempt. Bryn appeared beside him like a reflex, her hand on his arm. "You shouldn't be here," Tate said, keeping his voice low. "You're not on the guest list. I'll have you removed." "I just came to see the groundbreaking," I said. "Dad would have wanted to see this too." Bryn leaned in. "Leigh, you need to leave before you embarrass yourself. There are city officials here. This isn't the place." "I know," I said. "It's actually a perfect place." I had already texted Petra. She had already texted her contact. A man in a gray suit detached himself from the edge of the crowd and walked toward us, and 2 others followed him. And the thing about investigators from the state attorney general's office is that they don't look like much until they show their identification. He showed it to Tate very quietly, just the 2 of them, and I watched Tate's face go from contempt to confusion to something I had never seen on him before: fear. The gray-suited investigator asked Tate to step aside. Bryn grabbed Tate's arm. Someone from the catering staff stopped and stared. A city council member turned around to see what was happening. Tate was taken aside, and then Bryn. The investigators worked quietly, without drama, the way competent people do. There was no scene exactly, more a slow deflation, the caterers unsure what to do, the city officials quietly excusing themselves, the champagne flute sitting there unopened. One of the local reporters figured out something was happening and started taking photos. I didn't address anyone. I didn't need to. I walked over to the edge of the tent, found a water bottle on the catering table, and I stood there and I watched. Tate looked at me once from across the tent while one of the investigators was speaking to him. I didn't look away. The aftermath took longer than the confrontation, as it always does with these things. The quitclaim deed was voided by the court, the forged incapacity letter dismissed. The criminal case worked through the system over the following 8 months. My brother and sister-in-law were each charged with elder financial abuse, forgery, and fraud. Flora testified. The physician who had documented my father's cognitive status on the day of the alleged signing testified. The notary, Sheila Bose, agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced charge. She confirmed she had signed the notarization without witnessing my father's signature at Tate's instruction, without ever meeting my father at all. Tate pleaded guilty. He received 4 years with eligibility for early release. Bryn received a suspended sentence and significant fines. Meridian Build was dissolved. The Briarwood contract evaporated. My firm offered me my position back when the manufactured emails were forensically disproven. The metadata confirmed they had originated from an IP address registered to a device on Meridian Build's office network. I thought about it for a while. I took the job back because I was good at it and I had earned it, but I also filed a wrongful termination claim, which settled quietly for an amount that helped considerably with my legal fees. My mother and I don't speak often now. She has never apologized. She has sent 2 cards, one after Tate's sentencing, one at Christmas, that said things like, "I hope we can find our way back to each other as a family." I've kept them. I'm not sure why, except that I think someday I might want to remember exactly what it looked like when someone chose the wrong child and could not bring themselves to say so. The house is mine. I moved in 3 months ago. It's smaller than I remembered, the way childhood houses always are when you come back to them as an adult. The kitchen has that same pale yellow tile my father never got around to replacing. There's a pull-out sofa in the back room that I keep meaning to get rid of. I sit on the porch some evenings, and I think about the word roots. The way my father said it to a home care nurse, he'd only known 6 weeks, as if it was something he'd been carrying for a long time and needed to set down somewhere safe before he ran out of time. I think about the dinner table in November and Tate cutting his salmon and not looking up. I think about what it costs to be the daughter who stays, who handles it, who doesn't make a scene, and how for a long time the price of that was invisible because nobody was adding it up. I'm the one who adds things up now. It's my house, my foundation, mine. The invoice was paid in full. It just wasn't paid by me. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to do what Tate did. To sit across from your sister at a dinner table 11 days after your father's funeral, cut your salmon, and explain, calmly, with eye contact, why the house your father promised her is now collateral for your business. To have already prepared the forged deed, to have already coached the notary, to already have the fake letter ready in a drawer somewhere, written in your sister's handwriting, dated to a weekend she spent at a wedding in another state. That's not a crime of impulse. That's a crime of patience. And I think that distinction matters. Because for a long time, I made the mistake of believing the people who betray you are acting out of desperation or fear or some version of love that got badly twisted. It made it easier to absorb. If Tate had stolen from me because he was panicking, because the business was collapsing and he didn't know what else to do, I could have filed that under human weakness and eventually moved on. But that's not what happened. What happened was deliberate and layered and prepared well in advance, and I had to sit with that truth without letting it eat me. What I kept coming back to in those months when I was eating cereal for dinner and reading that lawsuit filing over and over was this: they had counted on me to be exactly who I had always been. The one who doesn't make a scene. The one who doesn't make a scene. The one who absorbs the cost. The one who is responsible and stable and won't risk the family's reputation over something as unseemly as money. They weren't wrong that I was that person. They were just wrong that I would stay her. Staying silent when you've been wronged is not the same as being good. I had confused those two things for most of my adult life. I thought that keeping the peace was a form of integrity, but the peace I was keeping wasn't real. It was a surface maintained specifically so that certain people could operate beneath it without friction. My compliance wasn't generosity. It was a resource they were using. Flora didn't have to call me. She had no legal obligation, no personal stake. She called because she had watched my father in his last weeks, and she understood, in the plain-spoken way that people do when they spend their days with the dying, that what was being done was wrong. That one act, a stranger choosing honesty at no benefit to herself, was the thing that broke the case open. I think about that often, about how much turns on the small decisions of people who owe you nothing. The attorney, the medical records, the hotel receipt, all of that mattered. But the integrity of a home care nurse named Flora, who remembered what she saw and decided it deserved to be said, is what made the rest of it possible. That's not a small thing. That's actually the whole thing. I don't think people who do what Tate did ever fully believe they'll be caught. I think they rely on the accumulating weight of what they've constructed, the forged documents, the manufactured narrative, the social pressure to make resistance feel impossible. And for a while, it did feel impossible. But impossible and difficult are not the same thing, and I had spent enough years solving difficult problems to know the difference. What I know now, sitting on that porch in the evenings, is that the work of rebuilding after that kind of betrayal is mostly internal. The house was returned, my job was returned, but the thing I had to rebuild from scratch was my own willingness to trust my perception of what was real. When everyone around you insists that a forgery is your signature, that a crime is a family decision, that your anger is instability, you start to doubt the ground you're standing on. Getting that ground back required the same thing it took to prove the case, one verified fact at a time, nothing unsupported, no shortcuts. My father wanted me to have roots. I think what he meant was that he wanted me to have something that was undeniably, irrevocably mine. It took longer than he planned. It cost more than either of us expected, but I have it now, and I know exactly what it cost, which means I know exactly what it's worth.